All right, we are going to cover NFPA 70E 2024 changes. Importantly, we need to know, well, what's new and how does it affect your electrical safety program? For those of you who have been joining us in the past, we did do a full hour-long presentation called 2024 NFPA 70E Simplified that is available on our YouTube channel. So you can always go back and watch that at a later date. Or if you want more information after this one. This is going to be recorded and put on YouTube, so apologies for those of you who might have to hop off a little bit early because we got started late here from those sound issues. So you won't have to miss anything. The recording will be available for you to watch at a later date as well. So for today's quick training, we're going to talk about, well, what is the 70E? What revisions have it gone through, and what specific changes to the 2024 70E do you need to note and update your electrical safety program accordingly with? Now, I will point out that the 2024 version obviously has been out for over a year at this point. It's a year and a half, more than that actually, but it is still important to remind ourselves what has changed so that we stay compliant. I know a lot of people, whenever the next edition comes out, they take the time to go through and review it, but they may or may not have the ability to update their program at that exact moment. And so you might need this refresher to go back with. Okay, so OSHA does recognize arc flash and electric shock as hazards in general industry and require employers to understand the industry standards that we utilize to protect workers. When it comes to the difference between codes and standards, there are quite a bit of details there. You know, codes can be adopted and enforced in law. Standards are used to support electrical safety regulations, but it's not directly law. OSHA regulations do, however, have electrical safety requirements, and the NFPA 70E, just like many other NFPA electrical codes, have been developed in a way to give you that guidance to comply with those regulatory requirements. So yes, it is multiple standards that we need to follow, not just the NFPA 70E. We've got the installation requirements and the maintenance requirements in the NFPA 70, more commonly called the National Electrical Code or NEC, and the 70B, the standard for electrical equipment maintenance. So you do still have to follow those as well as the NFPA 70E. The standard for electrical safety in the workplace, the 70E, the one we're really focusing on today, is the one that provides the practical, safe working area for employees relative to the hazards arising from the use of electricity. Great. Basically, what work practices, procedures, personal protective equipment, hazard analysis tools, risk assessments, job plans, forms, what needs to be included in your electrical safety program, and how should workers implement those tools and resources and that knowledge. That's where we get the 70E guidance. So there are 3 different hazards that are mainly addressed in the 70E. The top 3 would be the electric shock hazard, arc flash, and arc blast. We've spent plenty of other webinars going into more detail about what these hazards actually are and how they hurt people. So I'm going to save some time today and say, yes, those are all still very much addressed in the 2024 edition. And for more information, you can always reach out to me to just talk later or go to our YouTube channel. Like I said, there's a bunch of other recordings from previous webinars there as well. Okay, so a quick overview of what the NFPA 70E entails. The first up, Chapter 1, Safety-Related Work Practices, is probably the most commonly referenced chapter, the most commonly referenced section of this book. It has the application of safety-related work practices and procedures for pretty much every industry. Not all, but the vast majority. Chapters 2 and 3 get into more specifics. Chapter 2 about safety-related maintenance requirements, which in my opinion is a little bit redundant to the NFPA 70B, but for those who aren't familiar with the 70B, but they have a 70E, great. We've got some information in Chapter 2 on what needs to be done for maintaining your equipment properly. And then there's Chapter 3 for safety requirements with special equipment. So battery rooms and laboratories and lasers and stuff like that. Okay, so a lot more specific detail there for kind of unique applications is how I typically use that. So getting familiar with what is included in the 70E is something we're going to briefly run through today, but mostly I just want to point out what's changed, what's updated, the things that you need to keep in mind. Now, it is updated every 3 years. Okay, so we're working on the 2024 version. That means in just another couple years, 2027, we're gonna have another edition out, and I've got a little teaser about that one as well. There is public input to update these standards. It is truly public. Anyone can submit that input or comment and propose changes to the standard. You have to follow their guidance and their process. You can't just say, hey, I don't like this, make it go away, or I think this would be better. No, there's a specific form and process and making sure that it makes sense for the vast majority of people who have to apply this. That's where the technical committee comes in. They review every single public input and comment to make sure that what is being put out as the industry standard makes sense for, again, pretty much every industry, all the ones that are covered by the 70E. They pour over everything and make sure it's as best it can be for that revision cycle. There are multiple drafts and rounds of voting, the whole 9 yards, so to speak. Okay, so we're gonna dive into the changes specifically to the 2024 edition between 21 and 2024. Mostly just gonna highlight things that you need to know. I will say a lot of the changes and additions were structural, just reorganizing and making it align with the new NEC style manual. So there's some added sections for scope, so it pushed out the article references quite a bit for different things, so might be a little tweak there. Otherwise, like the actual changes that might affect how you implement the 70E, honestly, most of them were clarifications, in my opinion. You know, clarifications or adjustments so that it includes new equipment that has been developed since the last edition was released. So nothing too earth-shattering, all things considered, thankfully. So if you have an electrical safety program and it was compliant with the 2021 edition, it won't take too terribly much, unless you have a lot of special equipment, to get it updated to the 2024 edition, okay? So just a real quick reminder here for those who aren't aware, there are multiple ways to get access to the latest and greatest 70E. Of course, you can purchase a physical copy going online to their website there. In the handout, which you should be able to download from GoToWebinar here today, you'll be able to click those links from the PDF handout of these slides. So you can purchase a copy, you can sign up for the NFPA link subscription, which is super smooth, super nice. I recommend that one, especially if you need multiple codes and standards. You can get access to all the NFPA codes and standards through NFPA link, that subscription process. Or what we're gonna do today is the free access online. So you make an account and then you can go open up the free access. All right, so let's go ahead and get that opened up. There we go. So in the 2024 70E standard, jumping right to chapter 1, like I said, a lot of the changes were structural. Actually, we're gonna go back to 90. So every section now has a scope added. All right, so whenever you get a physical copy of the NFPA 70E, it'll have notes, highlights, and little symbols and markers to let you know what's changed since the last edition. So 9.1 scope has been added, and you'll see that in every article subsequently. The .1 for each article is the scope. Covers the use, application, and arrangement of the standard. Great. Just gives you an idea of what you should expect in each article. Now, some verbiage was changed, so instead of just saying not covered, what's not covered, it says workplaces covered and not covered, because this is the standard for electrical safety in the workplace, not just, you know, at home. Although I recommend some people who like to do projects at home kind of reference this every now and then too. It does specify that explanatory material in the annexes are based on the latest and greatest of each standard. So unless the standard reference includes a date, the reference is to be considered the latest edition of the standard. In other words, throughout the book, if it has an external reference to another code or standard and it has a date next to it, it's specifically calling out that edition of the requirements. Otherwise, they're saying whatever the latest and greatest says for, let's say, the National Electrical Code, that's what you should be following, okay? And then we get into the definitions. A number of definitions were added or modified in the 2024 edition. So some extra information about the scope of the definitions, which is great, but I will say one of the big changes is that they now add in definition explanations or links, so to speak. So if there's a definition that is specifically supposed to be used for a specific article, so in other words, battery effect 310, if it's only applicable to a specific article, it'll have that article referenced in the end of the definition in parentheses. So battery, this definition applies to the information in Article 320. So the way that they're describing a battery here is applicable to Article 320. Okay? Another option is the brackets. So there's the parentheses, which points you to a specific article about that topic regarding that definition. And then there's the brackets, which points out that it's the exact same definition as can be found in the code. So the National Electrical Code, NFPA 70, in Article 100, this exact same verbiage will be found for bonded. So a little cross-reference there, very convenient for those who go back and forth between the two books quite a bit. But again, nothing too earth-shattering. There's some other definitions, some rearrangements, such as whenever you're looking up boundaries, instead of having arc flash boundary and then restricted approach boundary, and they're in two separate places, they're all grouped together because they put the word boundary first, comma, arc flash, hearing protection, limited approach, lung protect. And then in parentheses after that, they put how you would typically look up a definition. Makes it easier for the NFPA link option because there's a search feature in that. So that's a helpful thing. Skipping over to more important things, we're going to go to Article 110 and talk about the fact that the electrically safe work condition policy is now right there, 1.2. Now they have to have the scope per the NEC style manual, so 110.1 is that scope. It's the article that general requirements for electrical safety related work practices, okay? 110.2 though is that electrically safe work condition, making it very clear and specific and explicit that you have to have a policy stating that you have to establish an electrically safe work condition prior to working on electrical components or circuit parts. So that's for anything 50 volts and greater, or if you decide that even though it's lower voltage, maybe there's a high chance of arcs and sparks and chemical or not chemical, thermal burns, excuse me, things like that. Some kind of typically abnormal situation, not a typical controls, I would say. It would be more like the more complex and unique things, low voltage but high current kind of stuff. Again, different applications can be found there. The policy and what's required hasn't changed all that much. They just moved it right up front to 110.2. All right, and then moving on, the next bigger item other than just organizational stuff would be in the job safety planning, there we go, job safety planning page in Article 110.3, I1, there's a list of things that need to be included in your job safety plans. And A through E were already there. If you've gone through training, you're pretty familiar. You got to know what you're doing, how you're doing it, what are the hazards, the risk assessments, and what are you going to do to protect yourself from those hazards. And then going over to the top of the page on the next column, an emergency response plan. So that item F right there at the top right of that page for job safety planning, I think a lot of people already included as part of their job planning process. What are you going to do if it all goes wrong? Now it's explicitly required in the NFPA 70E. So kind of funny that it's only added in the 2024 edition, but it is important because if you respond inappropriately in an electrical emergency, that could lead to multiple fatalities. So that is a specific step that needs to be talked about for each job safety plan, which needs to be done before starting each job that involves exposure to electrical hazards. Okay, then there's some more reference changes, some more verbiage updates just to make sure that it's clear to everybody. Gonna flip over to Article 120. 120.6, excuse me. Again, things changed and I'm still getting kind of used to that. 120.6 is talking about the electrically safe work condition process. Okay, so again, there's formatting stuff, great, whatever. It is important to know where it is and why it's there. I'm not trying to downplay that. However, actual application and what's in your safety program. Process for establishing and verifying an electrically safe work condition. There are 8 steps. There was some verbiage clarification for step 7, which is the key pivotal point of determining whether or not you have an electrically safe work condition. It's that verification of absence of voltage. If you do not verify that it is in fact de-energized with your meter, you can't know for a fact that it is off. And you have to make sure the meter works. So it's a live, dead, live, a triple check. Known voltage source needs to be used to verify that the meter is working. Now the key thing that was added here is that you have to use an adequately rated portable test instrument to test each phase, conductor, or circuit part at each point of work. So what does that mean? Let's say you turn off a disconnect and you're doing your live, dead, live. You do line side, load side, line side. Live, dead, live. Great. However, you still have to verify that it's actually off at the point of work, where you're going to be sticking your hands. Why? What if that was the wrong disconnect? What if there's a secondary source? What if there's a backfeed? None of that would be identifiable in that disconnect point necessarily. So you have to go where the worker's sticking their hands, and that's where the verification of absence of voltage needs to take place. Full stop, right there. I still hear a lot of people say, well, to turn off a disconnect, you open it up to get that visual verification that the blades are open, so I go ahead and do my live, dead, live right there. Great, fine, still do that, but you still then have to do your live, dead, live where you're sticking your hands, okay? So that clarification there, just to make sure that people don't miss a potential hazard. Again, this wasn't really too earth-shattering for those who had understood the intent of the standard to begin with, but you know, there were some common misunderstandings in this verbiage, so they clarified it. Okay, some other things that got updated, like electric shock instead of just shock, because there's multiple types of shock. So whenever you go around and you're looking at the standard, instead of saying, you know, shock risk assessment, everything's going to say electric shock risk assessment. Now there's also the shock wave from arc blasts and the capacitive energy discharge that they've taken into consideration as well. Okay, so stuff like that. The gloves, that's another one. So, you know, you're protecting yourself against these shock hazards within the restricted approach boundary. You have to have your insulated gloves with leather protectors, is what it used to always say. Well, now it's just protector gloves, because there are approved protector gloves that are not made of leather out on the market now. Leather protectors are still by and large the most common, but they understand that what's available and what's been approved needs to be allowed in the standard, because why not? It's been approved, it's been tested. Other nuances like the distance for the boundaries, the limited approach boundary here, it used to be 3 meters even, 10 feet, which conventionally that was correct. However, if you do the conversion, it's actually 3 meters, 3.0 something or another, and so you round down usually, but that leaves that margin of error where someone actually might be within that limited approach boundary of exposed movable conductors, but technically they're outside of 3 meters, that little margin of error. So they rounded everything up to the higher decimal point number rather than rounding down, which for safety, that makes sense. Kind of a little tangent there. All right, on the next page here in Article 130.5, this informational note is something that I like to point at quite often that was added. So 130.5B, informational note, says, in most cases, closed doors do not provide enough protection to eliminate the need for PPE in situations in which the state of the equipment is unknown to readily change. So if the doors are open or closed, you're racking in or racking out something, stuff like that. So if you're turning something on and off, for example, like a disconnect switch, and there is something potentially wrong with it, especially, well, that little door is probably not going to stop an arc flash if one were to occur in that enclosure. The pressure buildup would be enough to break that tiny little interlock switch, right? So doors closed does not eliminate the need for PPE if the state of in which the state of equipment is known to readily change. So bigger one is racking in and racking out. More people understand that, and I think have been doing that already, where they suit up whenever they're racking in and racking out stuff, especially while the gear's energized, which I really wish would stop, but I know some people have to, so they suit up for that. That's another example, very, very common. But it's added in there, something to keep in mind whenever you're doing your risk assessments and determining what needs to be applied there. Okay, skipping over, there were some more informational notes about the table here, estimating likelihood of occurrence. They added some information about larger, smaller available fault currents, how to actually apply this, understanding that there's some safety related design requirements that you can implement to lower the likelihood of occurrence. Good information here. Don't really have time to read it. Informational notes aren't enforceable anyway. They're just supporting material. Very, very important and helpful, but you know, again, as far as compliance, it's not totally absolutely required. Oops, I skipped to the end. When it comes to Chapter 1, the biggest clarification is the fact that, well, you can have other types of gloves, not just leather protectors. You could have other approved, mind you, tested and approved options there. We've got some informational notes. We've got the clarification that live, dead, live happens at each point of work. Okay? That is the by and large majority of the clarifications that you need to keep in mind. There's other things as well, but again, if you were compliant with the 2021 version and you knew the intent of it already, then you're pretty well covered. Chapters 2 and 3 add a lot more information about, again, safety-related maintenance requirements and some specifics for different equipment like lasers and power electronic equipment and capacitors. Okay, capacitors were a big thing to be added in previous editions. I'm going to flip over to some annexes now that I find helpful. So Annex S was added in the 2024 edition. And Annex S is essentially pointing out that you have to assess the condition of maintenance for your equipment. Now, again, it's informative annex, so it's not necessarily enforceable, it's just very helpful supporting material, okay? Informational purposes only. And it does point to the NFPA 70B for those who are getting up to speed and creating their maintenance plan according to the 70B, which implies that you're also following the manufacturer's requirements. Then great, you don't have to necessarily go into this detail. If you need a starting place, something to, it's just a quick one-page read through to understand, well, what generally speaking is required for condition of maintenance and how that impacts your electrical risk assessment process, then Informative Annex S is a great resource. I would recommend you read through that, especially if, you know, maybe you're trying to make the case to keeping up on your maintenance plan a little bit closer. Okay, now aside from that, again, it was mostly just organization updates. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the slide deck here and give you some, oops, there we go, recap. So OSHA does require employers to protect workers from these electrical hazards. Electric shock, not just shock because there's multiple types, electric shock, arc flash and arc blast. NFPA 70E is the recognized industry consensus standard for electrical safety requirements. It was created in the 70s and it's been through revisions multiple times. The 2024 edition was based on 240 changes. That sounds like a lot. A lot of them were just reorganization to get up to date with the style manual. I would recommend getting NFPA link or a physical copy of the NFPA 70E so that you can actually see those notes and highlights telling you exactly what changed and how, or if something was removed, they put a little dot saying something was removed and calls attention to that. Okay, so they did have to sort through and vote on all the public input and comments that they received to get us to the 2024 edition. Little note here, the 2027 70E update is currently underway. And I just want to point out, whoops, didn't mean to do that. I just want to point out, looking at my notes here, the 2027 has gone through the first draft, and there are quite a number of changes heading our way. The majority of the ones that seem to be proposed, I will say, apply more to Chapter 3. Some in Chapter 2, some in Chapter 1. Most of them are in the special equipment kind of information. So something to keep in mind, especially if you have capacitors, batteries, or solar that you need to look at. The 2027 edition, keeping an eye on those updates and changes. There is still time to provide input, to provide comments. So you can go to the NFPA 70E website, NFPA website for the 70E standard, and submit your public input or your comment. I forget which terminology it is for right now. It's different for each draft. You can see what's currently going on. You can go on there and it'll highlight, kind of like what it does in the hard copy, of what's being removed, changed, updated, or at least what's proposed to be changed and updated. And there are some things that actually are in Chapter 1 that are kind of exciting. There's a potential for an item to be added in there saying that you do have to have a second person if you're going to do energized servicing adjustment work. You know, if you're going to need an energized work permit per the standard, then you need a second person, a buddy system, so to speak, an attendant policy, which is great because I know a lot of companies that have adopted it, but it was hard. It was hard to justify having a second person. There was a lot of education needed there for upper level management, frankly, to spend the resources having two people there if there was energized work. There's a proposed line item added in there that if you have a signed off energized work permit, you're going to have a second person there for the sake of emergency response and helping make sure, well, hopefully nothing happens at all. So there are some pretty exciting changes coming our way. Again, there's still time. I recommend, if you have anything, to go check out that process for the next round of revisions. Now, for updating and ensuring compliance with the 2024 edition, go through what the 70E changes were, and go through your safety program. And especially if it's in like a Word doc or something, you can Control F, update all those terminologies, make sure the definitions are still accurate, things like that. You know, instead of just shock, say electric shock everywhere. For protectors, you know, if you decide that you're still just going to use leather protectors, fine, you can leave it. Otherwise, you know, if you have some workers that want to go ahead and get the different versions that are available that are ARC graded, then you can also add that in there. Verify that your electrically safe work condition policy is accurate and up to date, and that it specifies that you verify absence of voltage at each point of work. For example, mind you, there's other things, but go get a copy, make sure that you can compare 70E versus your program and just do that audit. There is also a handbook available. The 2024 70E handbook is available. It provides a lot more detail, explanation, some example scenarios even, of what is in this book and why, how they came up with this specific requirement, and what their intent was behind it. Because mind you, again, they have to write this in a way that's applicable to just about everybody. So what does that mean for you? What was the intent behind it? That handbook really does flesh out a lot of those questions. So once you do that, make sure you train and retrain your employees in management. And management, I will say that just real quick, I'll have a little soapbox. Supervisors and managers that do not have an understanding or respect for the NFPA 70E or your specific electrical safety program for that matter are not helping you. They're probably hurting more than they're helping as far as electrical safety is concerned. If they are not educated on what is required and why, if they don't see the value in it, then it's really not going to help your electrical safety initiatives. So management as well, supervisors, anyone who's in a leadership type role, whether they have that title or not. We all know those people on the job site or at your workplace that everyone kind of listens to them, everyone kind of looks up to them, and they're sort of in a supervisory role even though they don't have that title. Make sure that they also have buy-in on this whenever you're updating your program. Make sure it makes sense and they understand why this is so important. Okay, this is required every 3 years anyway to have training and retraining for all employees, qualified and unqualified, I will point out. So this is a good time to do it. Update your program, train over your requirements, which should then align with the 70E. If you don't know how to do that, don't feel comfortable, aren't totally sure if you did it right, we got you covered. We can definitely help with that. I've done a whole bunch of them at this point where I've created a safety program from scratch for you guys, or updated ones from the past, or taken what you have written up and fleshed it out a little bit better and really gotten to the meat of, well, what is the 70E saying and why? And how does it apply in your specific workplace? Those things are what I'm here for, okay? Helping you define electrical safety policies and practices to reduce the risk of injuries or fatalities from working with electricity. That is the goal of helping you with these electrical safety programs. Plus, by the way, that includes custom training. So once the project's done, we make a training and provide that to get everyone started, you know, that initial rollout of what are we doing here, what does your program now say, and why. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for some Q&A. Again, I apologize for getting started a little late today, guys, with the sound issues, but I appreciate y'all jumping right back on here and bearing with me through this training. So I do have a couple questions, and then I'll show my contact info in case you have follow-up after that as well. So Mike says, is LiveDead live testing to prove the meter is working? Yes, it is an electronic device. Voltage meters or multimeters do fail, and you should not trust that the reading is 0 unless you verified that it does work on a known source. So like an outlet, for example, 110, 120, something like that. If your meter's not giving you what you would expect, something's wrong with the meter or the outlet. So go grab another meter. If the outlet's reading right, then there you go. There's also these things called proving units, so you don't have to find an outlet or something. A proving unit will give you a reading of typically like 240 volts, but it's really low current, so it's not going to be hazardous. And that way you know if your meter reads 242, great. That is nominally within the range of what we would expect. When I read 0, I know my meter's working. I go back to my proving unit, read 240, 242, whatever, it's within that nominal range. You verified before and after that the meter's still working. Because again, you just never know. It's an electronic device, weird stuff happens. Okay, so Fernando says, it's true, I reported a lot of non-conformities according to the NFPA 70 in my job. They didn't like it. No, see, that's the thing. It's hard to get started if people aren't used to considering this. You got to come at it from a attitude of just trying to educate and bring awareness. I've definitely seen people try to preach it in a very harsh and dramatic way, and sometimes that's warranted. Just going to say that. Sometimes it is warranted, but most of the time it comes from a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness, a lack of background in the 70E. A lot of misconceptions are out there about hazards and what to do with them and why it's important. So yeah, it can take some time to change the culture and pointing things out little by little. Start with the highest priority stuff, I would say. The big ones, it doesn't take much to realize, yeah, that's a problem. Go ahead and start there, but it is a process. Does the 70E or 70B or OSHA have any time constraints on replacing rectifying devices that fail in arc flash hazard analysis? Okay, so typically an arc flash hazard analysis is telling you how severe an arc flash would be if it were to happen. There's also what we would call like an equipment evaluation, short circuit evaluation, to see if there was a fault, would the device even survive? I don't know of a specific timeline that they say you should have it replaced by or fixed by, so that it is now in compliance with the with the requirements, the rating requirements. I don't know that there's any specific requirement as far as time, like date. You find this and then you have to rectify it by, unless there's already been an audit and they're the ones pointing it out. They will set a deadline for that. I will say, if you find out that there's a problem, you don't fix it, and then something happens, that can be considered a willful violation, which is kind of scary if you know what that means. Okay, it means that you knew something was wrong and you didn't care enough to do anything about it. Timeline-wise, I'm not sure if that even comes into play. I imagine if you find the issue that day and then later that day there's a problem, that's one thing. But if it's been a few months and then something happens, you might not have much of a leg to stand on there. Okay. All right, as far as updating your program and getting it compliant, yes, we can help. My email is right there. You can email us, call the office. Someone will be able to reach out and get you some more information on what it means to truly audit and update your electrical safety program, or if you just need updated training. Maybe you're okay with the program, you've got that figured out, documentation is no big deal, but getting an updated training content for you, we can also work with that. And I can customize it to your safety program. So just let me know. I can always help out. All right, any other questions? I know we are over time. Again, thank you guys so much for sticking around. Appreciate your commitment to electrical safety here. If you don't want to stick around, again, there's my contact info. Reach out and let me know. We'll talk. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today, and I will just kind of fade into the background unless anything else comes up. I hope you guys get a little taste here on what the 70E has to offer. Again, I highlighted just the updates, so please go back and look at it yourself. Get some more information. There's a more extensive webinar about those changes that we recorded last year that you can find on our YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much, guys, and I hope you go home safely. Oh, I got a question here. Fernando, does NFPA 70 or the National Electrical Code specify that product manuals are required? Product manuals. My mind's going a few different paths there as far as like if you're developing things for consumer use, like if you're the one selling it, do you have to develop a product manual to go with it? If that's a requirement. There are other governing bodies, codes and standards that I do know have those requirements, so you might look at that. I'd have to look in the National Electrical Code to see if it says anything about that. But yeah, thanks, Fernando. I appreciate your engagement here, and you as well, Paul. Thank you. Thank you so much, guys.